All around the world, the belief in ghosts and in the afterlife persists, from Ireland and the belief in Fear Gorta, to many Native American tribes and their belief in spirits, to the Chinese practice of ancestor worship. Many cultures and religions encourage the veneration of the dead. The practice of veneration and reverence towards the dead has been integrated into Buddhism throughout the centuries, and with the Petavatthu has been integrated into the Buddhist canon. This demonstrates the flexibility of Buddhism and the integration of cultural practices into the religion. This flexibility has contributed to the overwhelming success of Buddhism as both a philosophy and a religion. The Petavatthu, translated as the Stories of the Departed, is a pre-Mahayana Indian text which is composed of 51 short stories detailing how impure action in this life can lead to rebirth in Petaloka, or ghost realm, in the next life. No one knows when the Petavatthu was composed or by whom. Some suggest it was sayings from the Buddha, while others claim it was written down in the 5th or 6th century AD, centuries after the Buddha had died. I will be discussing the definition of both the peta and the Petavatthu, the commonalities surrounding petas in Hinduism and Buddhism, and various countries' integration of the peta and celebrations surrounding them in order to demonstrate the flexibility of Buddhism. The Petavatthu is one of 15 books that compose the Khuppipasika, which is part of the Theravada Buddhism canon. It is comprised of stories to be used for teaching what one needs to abstain from in order to avoid being reborn as a peta. A peta, or preta in Sanskrit, is a hungry ghost with a human form, but it has a face like the peak of a mountain, a belly like a mountain or the ocean, and a mouth like the eye of a needle. They live in a Petaloka, hungry ghost realm, that exists on the same plane as humans, but are invisible to the naked eye and can only be seen through the power of meditation or by a peta's own will. There are 4 different types of petas, each uniquely based on their own karma. Each person's own accumulation of bad karma determines the amount of time you spend as a peta. For some spirits, it is days. Other stays last for years, but it is your own actions which determine it. The Paradattupajivika peta is the only peta who is able to live off the dakina, or offerings from humans. It is because of these petas, Buddhists are encouraged to give food and clothing to Buddhist monasteries, or shelter to traveling bhikkhus, and dedicate the acquired merit to a deceased relative. In order for the offerings to benefit the peta, it must fulfill the criteria of being given by a virtuous person, dedicated to a deceased relative who is now a peta, and the peta must be aware of the offering that is being given in his or her honor. Once the peta has received the dedicated merit, they may be released from the Petaloka and reborn in a different realm. The Khuppipasika peta suffers from a hunger and thirst that cannot be abated. The living relative of this peta can do nothing to ease its suffering, and it must bear it until their evil karma is gone. The Nijjhamatanhika peta suffers from its own lust and cravings in the human life, and as a consequence has fire burning in its mouth all the time, representing desires which can never be fulfilled. Like the Kalakancika peta, the relatives of this peta can do nothing to shorten the suffering. It must last until his or her evil karma is gone. Unlike the other peta, the Kalakancika peta is very tall, but appears to be like a dry leaf with only skin covering the skeleton. His eyes protrude like those of a crab, and his mouth is extremely small. He too suffers from unquenchable thirst and hunger. There are many other petas, but these are the essential 4 categories. There is a 5th type, called the Vemanika peta. Vemanika refers to the heavenly realm described in the Vemanika Vattu, which precedes the Petavatthu in the Khuppipasika. This peta has accumulated good and bad karma, and as a consequence spends his days in the Vimana, the heavenly realm, but at night descends to the Petaloka and spends the night as a peta. This will continue until his or her evil karma has been exhausted. The penalty for the peta is often very similar to the ill deeds performed in the human realm. One example from the Petavatthu is a peta who is lovely in appearance, but there are worms devouring his mouth which has a putrid odor. This is because in his prior life he was wicked and ill of speech, was unrestrained with his mouth. As you can see, the consequences was fitting for the deed. There is a similar format to all the stories within the Petavatthu. There is a layperson who commits some sort of immoral act. That person eventually dies and begins their suffering as a peta. They appear to a kinsman usually, and tell them about their karmic retribution and advise them to live a moral life. The story then ends, or it continues, with the peta imploring the kinsmen to give an offering in their honor in hopes of releasing them from the peta loka. The kinsmen will do so and transfer the marriage onto the peta, allowing it to be relieved of its suffering, and often it is transported to the Devi realm, or God's realm. The Petavatthu was originally written in Pali, the language of Theravada Buddhism used in chants and literature. As mentioned, the actual history of the Petavatthu is unknown. The author and the date it was taken down remains unclear, but it did eventually become part of the Pali canon. Some scholars have observed clear differences between the Petavatthu and the other books in the Kalakancika, and it has been suggested that it was included because of its widespread appeal among the laity. Others have gone farther and suggested that these are merely popular ghost stories given a Buddhist veneer, demonstrating an extreme of the practice of adopting cultural traditions of the area. Either way, it is widely acknowledged that the stories within the Petavatthu differ from the others which compose the Kalakancika. There are startling commonalities between the Buddhist belief in petas and the Vedic belief in petras. The linguistic similarities can be explained by the geographic proximity of the languages, but the similarities between offerings on peta's behalf and the Brahmanical practices of the time are more interesting. Torkel Brecki takes issue with the concept of merit transfer in the Petavatthu and argues, the practice of merit transference clearly contradicts the Buddhist theory of karma, which says that an individual is totally responsible for his acts. One's fate after death cannot be influenced by others according to canonical Buddhism. This has been addressed by G.P. Malasikera, a modern-day Sri Lankan scholar who argues that one must explain the minds of the doers and the beneficiary. The doer performs the deed out of compassion to assuage the suffering of the peta. The beneficiary, the peta, becomes part of the original deed, not just a receiver of the merit, by associating himself with it. For example, if we were to examine the story of Nandasena and his wife Nanda in the Petavatthu, we see that Nanda's transformation from Peti, a female peta, to Devi resulted from her husband's compassionate act, selfless giving, and her own ability to intellectually appreciate and therefore rejoice in the virtue of a meritorious deed. Like their Hindu counterparts, petas depend on the living to alleviate their suffering, and their transformation happens in both mind and body in Buddhism, unlike Hinduism, where the transformation is purely physical. For example, if we return to the story of Nandasena and Nanda, the shining luminance of the Devi status is but a cosmological reflection of Nanda's newfound spiritual healthy mind. This body-mind transformation in Buddhism is the effect of an offering and needs no accompanying ceremony or ritual, unlike Hindu tradition. It needs to be noted that the motivation of the living relative for giving this offering is not out of gratitude or thanksgiving for the peta's life, but rather it is performed out of a sense of compassion for the peta. This is very similar to the dharmic duties performed by Hindus and shows that the stories of the Petavatthu, therefore, for the most part, provide a new Buddhist basis for the continuation of this popular act of piety. Essentially, Buddhism absorbs this devotional practice into its belief system, allowing it to appeal to a greater number of people. The practice of absorbing cultural practice has allowed Buddhism to adapt to its host culture, and because of this, Buddhism around the world looks very different. In Japanese Buddhism, there are two types of peta, Gaki and Jikininki. Gaki literally means hungry ghost, and they are similar in appearance to the petas with huge bellies and narrow throats. People are reborn as Gakis because of their desire for worldly pleasures like food, sex, money, etc., and often have an insatiable hunger for grotesque objects such as human corpses or feces. The Gaki are fed during the Segaki festival, translated as being the feeding of hungry ghosts, but has also been referred to as the Buddhist Thanksgiving. This service is supposed to teach the importance of giving to those who are in desperate need. It is an effort to expand who receive offerings. Since ancestor worship is such a large part of Japanese